Hi, it's Mike Rankin with Relational Advisors, and today I've got with me Scott Swango. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Great. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing quite well, thank you. And Scott is our underwriting consultant, and I thought it would be helpful to take a few minutes and just kind of walk through, I think, a subject that's on a lot of employers' minds right now if they're fully insured, this whole idea of should I go self-funded and what does that look like? And I would say if we kind of zoom out in the big picture, there's been a much larger trend for companies that are, 50, 100, 200, 300 employees to now go self-funding where they historically have always been fully insured. So Scott and I are going to walk through some slides here and cover that, just some of the key things to keep in mind as we move forward. So one of those things, Scott, is when we talk about, of course, it would help if I hit the button in the right direction. So we look at just kind of the basics fundamentally between fully insured and self-insured. How would you describe that?
I think fully insured is really just the easiest route to take. It's a fixed premium, a fixed rate for your members or employees of the plan, and you're just paying that rate over a course of 12 months. Mm-hmm. Depending on your size, you get data. Sometimes if you're too small, you do not. So you don't really have as much insight or detail on what's going on, what can you change to fix it. You just kind of at the end of the year get the renewal, and whatever that increase is, it's kind of tough to do anything about it.
Yeah, and the data you're talking about is like claim data,
yes,
right?
Claims data, even just the detail, and you might get very high level analysis of what happened in each month, but there's no real detail to see what's driving this, what changes can we make to improve the plan, to find savings. And I think that's where self-funding really takes a hold of that control. So the employer now holds the risk, especially with the claims. So instead of just paying the rates, you have, yes, the fixed premium, which is a smaller portion of the entire pie, but then you have claims that you're managing weekly, monthly that you're paying, and you can actually see what is the detail. What can we do? Maybe
to help control the cost or manage it.
For example, in plan design flexibility, you might have a bunch of members who are only going to the emergency room, which are driving up costs significantly. Maybe there's a plan tweak we can make to make it more beneficial or more cost advantage for just the member to
go to the urgent care
or even just the primary care, or be able to find simple solutions that can drastically change cost over the long period of time.
Got it.
I think is a huge advantage going self-funded.
So that fully insured is kind of like the easy button. They hit the easy button, and then going into self-funding and tiptoeing into that, there's more complexity and more moving parts, but also perhaps more opportunity for that employer to save cost.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of different components of that, right? As we get into it, and we'll touch on some of these as we go forward. But when we look at kind of our strategy of how we help an employer get into it, we like to think of it as this kind of crawl, walk, run, because there really is so much that can be done on the self-funding side. But that first step, that step one, is what we call level funded or graded funded. What is a level funded program? I don't know that a lot of decision makers are fully in tune with that option.
Mm-hmm. Level funded is almost that middle ground. So there's on one side, step one, fully insured, the very easy button. But then I feel like people think that if you're going to immediately go all the way to step 5+ into these advanced strategies where there's so many moving parts, but that's not always the case. There's a smaller step in there in step one called level funded, which is you get some of the benefits of self-funding, like more access to claims, a little more flexibility in just the plan designs, or being able to access some strategies to help save costs. But it's programmed to feel pretty much exactly like fully insured. You get those fixed premium rates.
You know what you're going to spend
exactly
at
each
the
month.
end of 12 months.
It can never get worse. That is your worst case scenario. And then at the end of the year, if your plan did run well, depending on that percentage of the claims fund, which is normally about 60-70% of the total cost, if that section runs well, then you can potentially get a X amount of that back, 50%, maybe 2/3 of that
Yeah,
back.
depending on the contract, right?
So there is still that shared risk between the employer and the carrier. So in a lot of times, the carrier does take some of that surplus, they call it, back for those good running years. But then in self-funded, if you were to fully go over, you now own that risk, so you get to keep all of that savings in those well-running years.
Right. And I like to think of level funded. I mean, the reason we have it kind of step one there is if you're there for a couple of years, 2-3 years, then you've got some good track record of the claim data. And depending on the timing and what's happening with the claims, you're going to be in the best position to negotiate the best stop loss premium once you go self-funded, as opposed to coming out of fully insured with perhaps limited data. The stop loss underwriters get a little skittish on that, and you're not going to get your best deal, really at that point.
Absolutely, you definitely just get more insight. I think that crawl is a great step to take, to just get a feel, get an understanding of what it might look like, and then keep building that year after year.
Yeah. And so sometimes when we say self-funded, we're really talking partially self-funded, right? Because we do buy components of insurance to protect the employer, right? And so how do those break down? What are the two pieces that the employer purchases?
Yeah, the two biggest almost additional insurances you're adding on to your program is specific stop loss and aggregate stop loss. Specific is for each individual member and those high cost, maybe one time, maybe ongoing catastrophic claims. So let's say there's a threshold that each employer sets depending on their risk tolerance. Let's say it's $100,000 for every single member on the plan. After that, if, let's say, someone on the plan goes to $1 million in claims, the employer is not responsible for all that full million.
Yeah.
You buy that protection, so they're capped at $100,000, and then you get reimbursed back from the stop loss for the $900,000 that's now on their responsibility. Now, aggregate is protection for all those claims under that threshold. So as the year goes on, everyone member
you
on the
have
plan.
10 of those stop loss claims, it starts to add up.
Exactly. And then if that volatility or those high claims start adding up over time, it becomes a cap on what that total amount is. So either one person or everyone on the plan, there's protections in place so it doesn't completely ruin the performance.
So if we were to look at that visually here, kind of what are we looking at here at the specific stop loss?
Yeah, so the specific stop loss, remember, it's that individual protection for each person. So as we can see on those blue charts or the blue columns, each one of those lines is one particular member of the plan.
One claim or one member with their claims.
Yes. Yeah. So then on the example, we have an $80,000 threshold or cap for each person. So anytime the one member who has a catastrophic claim goes over that $80,000, it now becomes the responsibility of that additional protection you're buying. So those numbers could essentially become unlimited depending on what's going on, what treatment plan, what kind of condition they have. So that protection really stops that and just kind of relieves that anxiety or that nervousness that if we have one person who has a terrible claim, we're not in trouble. We're not going to go bankrupt because we can't pay for it. That
protection. And then when we look at it, we say, okay, well, what if we have multiple of those specific claims? How do we protect against that?
And that's the aggregate. So everything under that cap. So that $80,000 is what they call your claims fund. So a carrier will underwrite this, try to use your claims data to see what the trends are, what is expected for this claims fund and what is needed. But then what you do is add aggregate stop loss on top of that. Typically, it's a percent over what is projected. So 10%, 25%. So
it's kind of like a not to exceed number. We know that if everything kind of goes to hell in a handbasket, claims wise, that you're not going to pay over X amount.
So it is all considered that max liability. It is the employer's responsibility, or they have to pay those claims. But it's not in a self-funded strategy. It only happens in the worst case scenarios. So yes, they expect or project whatever terminology the carrier will use. to say, we think your claims are going to run here, but in the worst case scenario, 25% more than that is your limit.
Right.
And it can't get worse than that.
And it's interesting when you bring that up. It reminds me that a lot of times, a CFO or an employer will look at, maybe they're looking at their fully insured renewal, and they're comparing it against the max, the worst case scenario. But I think what's important to remember, and a lot of times that max, that worst case scenario is a few percentage points higher than even their renewal, right? One would think. But it only happens 2% or 5% of the time. So it's not really like an apples to apples type comparison. It really is. And it's amazing to me that how good the actuarials are on predicting that expected level. Of course, it does vary from that, but usually it's pretty spot on. So if we were just to break it down a little bit further, I think this is always interesting as employers are looking at this question of, how do I set my specific deductible? Should it be $50,000 or $250,000? What are some of the factors that go into that, employer size and risk tolerance and things like that?
Absolutely. So obviously us as relational advisors will help with that decision, but a lot of that comes down to group size. So as a group gets larger, there's the law of large numbers, so there's more predictability in all the claims data that you have, but also there's typically more cash flow. So depending on the risk tolerance of the company, as we see, or as most people in this industry do see, as the group size or the covered employees get larger, they're able to obtain or have more risk.
Retain more risk.
So that risk, so the higher the actual specific deductible gets, the fixed premium to have that coverage comes down, because more risk is now on the employer to cover claims. So that's a big trade-off. Another one is just the position of the employer, just how readily available is that cash flow? So can we afford $100,000 in claims in the first couple of months for one specific person if that first year runs really bad?
Yep. And just on that note, I think about, risk tolerance. There are some employers who would just prefer a little more stability. And sometimes we get caught up in the terminology of specific deductible, but just think about it like any insurance, auto insurance. When you have a higher deductible, the premium is lower, right? And so it's just kind of measuring that for that employer, and then also looking at what the estimated number based on their size, estimated number of claims over that specific deductible would be.
Yeah, I think that's where like claims data, doing level funded, getting some insight helps with that decision as well.
Right.
To kind of see over time, what have we been doing to project for the future instead of just guessing and seeing what happens.
Yeah, perfect. So when we talk about stop loss provisions, obviously we could see it's a relatively busy slide. There are 5 different components. Each component, we could probably do a 30 or 40 minute session on each one. But very quickly, just to talk about the number 4, the lasers, a laser terminology. I think that's something that maybe people have heard before, but they're not totally in tune with what that means. So what is a laser in the context of stop loss insurance?
Yeah, so a laser is probably what most employers are scared of. It's the reason they don't want to go self-funded. They think of that as a risk because they've heard that buzzword. So what a laser is, as we remember, a specific deductible is for each individual member. Let's say it's $100,000, but for one individual claimant, there might be a high catastrophic condition that's going to be ongoing that maybe is projected for $500,000, $600,000. What a laser does is now, instead of doing a premium increase on the specific deductible for 50% to cover that, they target the one individual and raise that specific deductible. So now every member has $100,000 except for that one person who now is $500,000, $600,000, whatever that laser might be. So it's really just a target of one person, kind of taking that risk away from the stop loss carrier and putting it back onto the employer. So now the employer is responsible for it. So it really does end up becoming a factor of what happens with that person in that
Right.
next year, because
Right.
they could be
It's
lasered.
not always 100% probability that they're going to hit the laser.
Like, it's a scary thing to think I need an additional $500,000
$500,000,
for this one person, but if they end up being perfectly fine and paying $100 for their claims,
Yep.
then that risk is now gone essentially.
Right. And it smooths out the renewals theoretically on the stop loss premium that you're paying as well.
Because that premium is going to, if you do the 50% increase on the premium, it's only going to keep growing.
Right. Yeah.
Who
From
knows
there.
how long
Right.
from there.
Exactly. Got it. So when we talk about purchasing stop loss insurance, and so now we've kind of moved on from level funding, and now we're looking at self-funding or partially self-funding, and we need to purchase our stop loss. We can either purchase it on the open market, or we can purchase it through what's known as a consortium or a captive. So what are kind of some of the high-level differences between a consortium and a captive?
Yeah, so I think both are the same in you're pulling together with other employers that are like-minded and essentially spreading that risk, so you're not by yourself. A consortium, what they do is you pool together and spread that risk across the many, but
You're not buying in like you are in a captive.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
right.
a captive, you're buying in, you're becoming an owner of that plan with everyone else. So there's more involvement from the team to help control costs, to help manage everyone. So it's more of a team effort versus just individually being by yourself and then
Yeah.
kind of working together so they can keep the captive healthy. You can keep everyone's rates lower, risk lower, and just kind of help managing everyone except for being by yourself.
Right.
Consortium can start to feel more level funded, especially for their fund the max route. But I think a captive feels more in tune with self-funding than a consortium
Yeah.
would.
Yeah, and I think of it as a consortium as kind of like buying a wholesale from Costco. You know, you're pooling together with other people and buying there, and then a captive is you're kind of setting up your own grocery store. And you pay into that captive with a capital contribution. But then you're sort of like in the club, if you will. Some people prefer the consortium route. Doesn't have the capital contribution required, and you're still pooling with others. Others prefer the captive route for that stop loss insurance. But certainly, if you're, let's say, 50 to 250 employees, it makes a lot of sense to evaluate both. If you're 1,000 or 2,000, you can buy directly on the open market because the benefit that you get from pooling with other employers tends to start diminishing in that 750 to 1,000 employee range.
As your claims get more credibility,
Exactly.
the trends start to level out and becomes more that law of large numbers that becomes pretty consistent over time.
So now we're in kind of the run category, and we turn our attention to the pharmacy benefit managers. And I think a lot of people have heard a lot about this recently because, pharmacy costs are the biggest component of the insurance dollar. Usually anywhere from 30 to 40% now is what we're seeing in terms of pharmacy spend, especially with, biologic drugs and these very costly treatments. They're very beneficial, but they're also very costly. So pharmacy is one of these, expense line items that's growing pretty rapidly. And by doing a pharmacy carve out where you're actually looking at separating out the pharmacy purchasing of the PBM, the pharmacy benefit manager, into one of the more transparent PBMs, where the rebates now, instead of going back to the insurance company, the rebates on these pharmacies are actually coming back to the plan and helping reduce cost. In this particular example, it's where an employer went with an independent PBM and saved around 45% of just that pharmacy spend. So not every carve out is like a super home run like this, but even if you save 20 to 30% on 30 to 40% of your spend, it really has a dramatic effect on the overall cost trajectory for that employer. So again, that's in the run category, and you kind of get to that over time once you've got all the other pieces. So, kind of wrapping up, obviously, the way we think about it is, when you're fully insured, you renew each year and you make a 12-month decision. When you're self-funding, you make decisions that tends to be more over time. You tend not to be trading out the underlying vendors as much, assuming your stop loss is probably the biggest one, and then your third-party administrator or the TPA, being the other. But if you would like more information on this or any of the slides, just go ahead and put your contact information in. And Scott, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Nice job.
Thank you for having me.
You got it.